Hi, this is Cappy Saxton. I'm from Always in Stitches, and this is part 2 in a series of 3 videos that talks about thread, needle, and tension. So if you missed number 1, you may want to go back and learn about thread. It's a little like, okay, who cares, but you need to understand how all 3 of these work together. They're kind of the triad that makes your projects turn out great. And if you don't understand the connection, it may not make sense, some of the things I say now or the subsequent video. So the first one was thread. Now we're talking about needles. And I'm not talking about like the kinds nurses use or doctors or those scary needles. I'm talking about your sewing machine needles. And this will probably be a little shorter than the other video, just because there's kind of not quite as much to talk about. But there are some things you need to know about needles. I talked about the TNT, the thread needle tension combination, and how sometimes that makes your head just want to explode because you don't know why your machine's not working. The thread isn't running through it right. The needles are breaking. The tension is awful. I can tell you those 3 things are connected. So we're going to talk about needles, but I don't want you to be scared because they're really not a scary thing. It's just you need to understand the way that needles are designed and the way sewing machines are designed to make your needles work effectively. So, there's some things you need to understand about a needle. There are, every needle for every machine, regardless of where the machine came from, has some unique features about it, and that's very consistent. The shank is what goes up into the head of your sewing machine. Sometimes those have a flat side, sometimes they're round. So it's very important you know which side is the front and which side is the back. The shaft of the needle is a specific length, specifically for your sewing machine. And then there's a groove in the front of the needle. It's like a little valley that runs from the top of the shaft all the way down just to below the eye of the needle. Of course, the eye of the needle you're familiar with, and then the point of the needle. What you don't always realize is on the back of most needles, there's also an area called a scarf. And what you have to have that for is for your hook race to come around and connect with the thread. So what's a hook race? In the bottom of your sewing machine, where the bobbin sits, there's a little thing that makes the bobbin kind of basically spin around, or there's a hook that comes around and catches the needle thread, and that's how the loop is made to make a stitch. So if you look at this picture, this one's another little small, but you can see there's a needle. It's coming down into the fabric. There's a shaft, or there's a valley in the front. Right in the front here is where that groove is, where the thread's going down inside and it's coming back up. There's the hook, the little gap right there where the hook goes through and catches that loop. So in order for your thread to make a stitch every time it goes through your sewing machine and into the fabric, through the batting, through the fabric again, the needle has to come down with the thread hanging out the back, and the hook comes around like this, catches that loop, and the needle goes back up, and then it comes back down, and the hoop comes back around, it comes up and down. So we're just doing this all the time. Well, wait a minute. Down, hook, up. Down, hook, up. Down, hook, up. Okay, so that's how your sewing machine makes a stitch. So I want you to think about that concept now and understand how important it is that the distance between the eye of the needle and how long this shaft is and where that point hits in that entire process. It's a very mechanical process that if the eye of the needle is in the wrong place or the eye of the needle is too big, that loop that's been made in the thread can't be caught by the hook race. So that's how your machine functions. And that's why it's super, super, super important that we get this all connected properly. And that's why I'm going to tell you, depending on the brand of machine you own, you need to be sure you put the proper brand of needles. So we have all kinds of needles available in our store, from different companies. We have the Schmetz brand, and we have the Oregon brand, which are the ones that you use in the Janome. So these are Schmetz needles. These are what are called Oregon needles that they actually use for the Janome company. And depending on where you bought your machine, I would recommend you go back to that dealer and buy the needle that goes with your machine. They are proprietary. It does make a difference. Some of the needle companies will try and tell you, oh, our needle will work in every machine. Will it work? Yes. Is it the most effective and neatest and nicest stitch you can get using that needle? Probably not. if you care, you're going to want to use the right thing. Now, here's the other truth. I'm not making money selling needles. This is not my Fortune 500 opportunity in selling machine needles. I'm giving you this information because it's true. It's not about profit. It's just the truth. So be sure wherever you buy your needle, you get the right one. Now, here's the thing. If you watched my previous video, you heard me talk about thread size. And it's crazy. The thicker the thread, the smaller the number. The thinner the thread, the bigger the number. Needles are exactly the opposite. I don't know who thought that up, some crazy person. But the higher the needle number, the needle gets thicker. So if I'm looking at a size 14 needle, it's going to be a lot bigger than a size 9 needle. And I've got a little chart here. You've also got this metric and American, and we're not even going to get in that discussion about why they do it one way and we do it another. It's that over the pond thing. Everybody has a different idea. But the point is, you can find a chart almost every single sewing machine you buy anymore, or even online. There's lots of really good charts that tell you all about what the needle numbers mean and how to match them to the proper fabric. If I'm sewing on denim and I'm using a size 43 ply thread, I'm going to use a 14 or a 16 needle. If I'm sewing on chiffon or silk and I'm using a silk finish thread that's very small, that's a 60 or an 80 weight, I'm going to use a size 9 needle. So be sure you're matching your needle to your thread and to your fiber or your thicknesses. If I'm using 2 layers of cotton and maybe 2 layers of batting, I'm going to have to go up to a 12 or a 14 needle in order to get through all that. So there's more to a needle than just, oh, let's stick this one in the machine and see if it works. Consider how it matches and test it out. Sew your project. Put a little bit of your thread in, put your needle in, take a little scrap from what you were making, sew through it. Make sure it looks the way you want it to look, because that's what you're doing, is trying to make it look the best you can. And picking the right thread with the right needle will make that happen. So know your needles. Match your fabric to your thread. Use the needle design for your machine. If the thread is shredding, you might need to go to a higher needle. Or you might even need to go to a smaller needle. The eye of that needle is set to go with the proper size of thread. So I can have a size 14 needle that has a really big eye in it, but a size 9 needle has a very small eye in it. If I try and put big thread through the small eye of a 9, it's going to shred. If I try to put too small a thread to the eye of a 14, it's going to shred. It has too much room to wiggle around. So think about that. When you have a shredding issue, I would check my needle first. And then consider the quality of the needle. If you're not buying the needles designed for your machine, you're probably not getting the best quality needle you can get. And then here's the thing, and I have to just really laugh, because I can't tell you how many customers bring in their sewing machine and we tell them, well, have you changed the needle? And we get the question of, you mean you can change the needle? Okay, for the record, yes, you can change the needle, and you should change the needle. You should change it often. You should change your needle as many times as you put on deodorant, just about, because it's that important. Needles wear out. And the comparison I give you is, if you started your freshman year of high school with a number 2 sharp pencil, and it was sharp as, you know, I love that number 2 sharp pencil, man, that's just the best. And I start my freshman year with that number 2 pencil with a really nice good sharp on it. I've put it in an electric sharpener. I've just got that 2-up point. And my senior year, I am still using that exact same pencil, and I never sharpened it. It is flat and dull, and it's not going to function. The exact same thing true of your needle. Needles get dull, and they get dull fairly quickly depending on what you're sewing. Some projects, denim, heavier weight fabrics, are going to dull a needle quicker than your lighter weight fabrics. It's important that you use a ballpoint needle in situations where you want to push the fabric apart, such as polyesters. If you want to pierce the fabric and actually poke right through it in a very fine manner, like with embroidery, you're going to want a very sharp needle. So look at what you're doing and match the needle to go with it. And change your needle often. Every project deserves a new needle. I'd say at least every 8 hours, and if you're really running a lot of embroidery projects, you may even want to change more than that. You'll get to know your machine. It kind of makes a ka-thunk, ka-thunk, ka-thunk sound when the needle's dull. I always know, oh, time to change my needle as soon as I hear that. And I just put a little Post-it note on my machine that tells me what project I did last with that needle. But most of the time when I sit down, I change the needle anyway, just because they're maybe 50 cents a piece, and it's an investment towards the long-term life of my sewing machine. It's kind of like running a car with dirty oil. Don't do it. Don't run a machine with a dull needle. It's the same problem. So I think that concludes needles. I told you, needles is fairly short. Not a whole lot to say about needles. So part 2 is a short part of the video. Next we're going to talk about tension, which I don't like to call it tension. If you watch, you'll find out what I like to call it better. But this will be then the next part. So this concludes part 2. What I like you to take away from this is change your needle often, use the needle design for your machine, and use the needle design for your project and your thread. Those are the most important takeaways from this video. So thanks for watching. Hope to see you on number 3.